they're not preferred members to read the Megillah, but even after the fact, they're disqualified. And so therefore, we could still say that the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yehuda, because this suggestion that you made, we can reject. We could turn around and say that just because they're grouped together, they're only grouped together in them not being the preferred person to read. But with regards to what happens after, it's a different law for each one. So then we could still fit our Mishnah with Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara presents another challenge to trying to read the Mishnah as referring to Rabbi Yehuda's view, because Midikatani Seifa, from the end of the Mishnah, where it teaches that Rabbi Yehuda machshi bekotan, that Rabbi Yehuda declares a minor to be qualified, miklal, this implies the Reisha la Rabbi Yehuda, that the beginning of the Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, because when you bring a statement and then you have another statement in the name of someone who seems to be disagreeing with the initial one, it means that the initial view is not the one of the one who you're quoting as having this differing opinion. So it can't be Rabbi Yehuda, right? You can't have Rabbi Yehuda start out the Mishnah and say everybody is fit to read the Megillah except for a mute and a deranged person and a minor, and then come along and Rabbi Yehuda says that a minor is qualified because that's an internal contradiction. So therefore, it can't be Rabbi Yehuda.
Your voice is not clear, Rabbi.
I'm sorry?
Your voice was not clear.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Sorry about that. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Perhaps the entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, not only the end, not only the end of the Mishnah, where it clearly states that the view of Rabbi Yehuda is that a minor is valid to read the Megillah, but even the beginning goes according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's the Gemara. 1 second. How are you going to have that? Mi dami reisha lipsula v'seif v'lechshira. How could you have in the beginning where we say that it's invalid, and at the end where it says that it is valid, meaning the minor? How does that work? The Gemara says, you know what? I'll tell you how. The Dilma Kula Rabbi Yehudi, maybe it's all in accordance with the view of Rabbi Yehuda, but Usrei Gavne Koton Ktonila, he's teaching about two types of minors. When he says that the preferred member to read is anyone besides a cherish, a sheta, and a koton, the deranged, the deaf, and the minor, is talking about a kind of minor that we'll see in a minute. The Gemara says, "V'chasurim mechasra," and there's something missing. In other words, let's try and establish the Mishnah in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda and say that there's something missing from the Mishnah and amend it to read as follows, and read it as if this is what the Mishnah actually said. Here goes. The Mishnah would say like this: everyone is qualified to read the Megillah. Chutz, besides, mecherish, shaita v'katan, besides for a deaf person, a deranged person, or a minor, and bamed dvarim amurim. What are we talking about when we say a minor? A minor is not qualified to read the Megillah with regards to a minor who hasn't yet reached the age of chinuch. Now, what age is that? So Rashi says 9 or 10. Others are of the opinion 10 or 11. But the point is that until he reaches that age, if he's younger than that age, then he is not going to be qualified to read the Megillah. However, if the child has reached an age where he is able to be trained to do the mitzvah, to appreciate the mitzvah and trained to do it, then even in the first instance, he can read the Megillah. Now, why would that even be possible? Why would that be a suggestion? So if you remember from the Gemara earlier, right, we had a discussion about whether women are obligated to hear the Megillah, and our servants obligated to hear the Megillah, and our children obligated to hear the Megillah. So we said about the women, right, that they are obligated to hear the Megillah. Why? Because they too were part of the nest. They were part of the miracle. How were they part of the miracle? They were part of the miracle because Haman's decree was against men, women, and children. If that's the case, so technically speaking, children are also obligated to hear the Megillah. The only thing is, they're exempt before the age of chinuch, right? However, once they reach the age of chinuch, then they would be obligated like the adults. Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan, because Rabbi Yehuda qualifies even a minor to be able to read it in the first instance and to fulfill his obligation and the obligation of others. Okay, so that's how we want to try and establish our Mishnah. That our Mishnah is saying that everything that it says in the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about lechatchila, meaning in the first instance. When it comes to the shaita and the katan, the deranged person and the minor, and talking about a minor who hasn't yet reached the age of chinuch, we're going to split the difference and we're going to say that even after the fact, you haven't fulfilled your obligation, because a minor who hasn't reached the age of chinuch and a deranged person are not obligated, and they cannot fulfill the obligation for anybody else or for themselves. However, when it comes to a cheresh, Rabbi Yehuda's view is that only lechatchila he shouldn't read it for anybody else or for himself. However, after the fact, you are yotza. And then the end of the Mishnah says, when it comes to a minor who has reached the age of chinuch, even in the first instance, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he can read the Megillah. Okay, that's how the Gemara wants to explain it. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay, says the Gemara, Ma Yukimta. Now, how do you want to establish the authorship of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda. You want to say it's in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. And you want to say with the Evan that we're talking about after the fact, meaning to say that after the fact, with regards to reading the Megillah, we say that you fulfilled your obligation. And you want to say that in the Mishnah, in Brachos, where Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda have a dispute with regards to saying Shema, whether you have to hear it or not, you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda over there, when he says he's fulfilled his obligation, it's only after the fact. But lechatchila, he holds like Rabbi Yossi that one should read it in a way that he's going to be able to hear it. Okay? Now, we're trying to see whether this can be applied to all the cases in the Gemara, in Mishnayos, where you have these differences of opinions, where we could establish it either like Rabbi Yossi or like Rabbi Yehuda. Frank, the Gemara, it's not going to work, and you'll see why. That which Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shimon ben Pazi, taught in a brisa, that what? A deaf person who can speak but cannot hear, may separate the truma even initially, which means to say, the Chachamim, right, they established the mitzvah of saying a bracha over the mitzvahs, right? When you do a mitzvah, you've got to say a bracha. You put on tefillin, you need to make a bracha, right? You get called up to the Torah, you need to make a bracha. When you go and you separate tithes, when you separate truma, not ma'aseh but truma, right? You have to make a bracha. Now the problem is the deaf person, right? Although he can speak, he won't hear his bracha. And we have over here a brisa. We have over here a brisa that says that he can go and he can give truma even in the first instance, even lechatchila, even though he's not going to be hearing his bracha. So now the question is, who are we going to establish this opinion according to? Mani, who is this the view of the brisa? Rabbi Yehuda. If you're going to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, that doesn't work. Why? Diavad in lechatchila loy. Because Rabbi Yehuda, we tried to explain just now, is of the opinion, and we're trying to apply this opinion across the board, that every case where you need to hear something, lechatchila, you need to hear it. It's only b'di'emet, only after the fact. If you already read the Megillah and you didn't hear it, that you fulfilled your obligation with the cheres, right? Or with regards to a katan, right? However, so therefore we cannot establish it according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yossi, if you want to try and say that it follows the view of Rabbi Yossi, that certainly won't work. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yossi, Di'evet Namila, Rabbi Yossi is of his opinion is quite clear that he holds that you cannot do it in the first instance, and even after the fact, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. So we're left without anybody who can take up the view that one can can give the teruma even in the first instance, even though he's not going to hear his bracha, his own bracha. We're talking about a person who is deaf but can speak. The elamai. So therefore, what are we going to have to do? You're going to say Rabbi Yehuda, right? You're going to say that the brisa about the truma follows the view of Rabbi Yehuda. It certainly can't work with Rabbi Yossi. So like Rabbi Yossi is out of the picture for a minute, right? So it's got to be Rabbi Yehuda. And you're going to have to say that what? Va'afila lechatchila. So you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda's view is that even in initially, right, he can say the bracha when he's giving the truma, right? Even though he's not going to hear it. Why can we say that? Because we're going to have to go back to the Mishnah in Brachos, and we're going to have to say about the Mishnah in Brachos that Rabbi Yehuda's view is even in the first instance. Okay, his view is even in the first instance. Okay. Ella, but we're still left with a problem. Ella ha that which says in another brisa, lo yivarich adam brichas hamazon beliboy, one should not make the blessing of grace after meals in his heart, meaning to say, when you say birchas hamazon, when you say grace after meals, it should be done in such a way that you can hear it, right? But what happens if you said it in a way that you can't hear it? The brisa says the imberach, if he did recite it, yatsa, he fulfilled his obligation. So now, money. Who's this opinion going to follow? Lo Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo Rabbi Yossi. This is not going to follow Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because if you're going to follow with what we just suggested, that Rabbi Yehuda says that lechatchila, in the first instance, you don't have to hear what you're saying. So, Rabbi Yehuda, afilu lechatchila. It should be that this brisa should say, even in the first instance, that you could read Birchas Hamazon quietly or in your heart, even though you can't hear it, because you told me that in brachos, right? His opinion is, you told me that in brachos, his opinion is that even in the first instance, he doesn't have to hear the Shema. So too with Birchas Hamazon, it should be the same. So therefore, clearly, it cannot follow the view of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yossi, and if you're going to say that it's Rabbi Yossi's view, that certainly won't work, because I feel they have a nami, because the end of the brisa said over here that what if he did make grace after the blessing of grace after meals in this manner, he's fulfilled his obligation. But we know Rabbi Yossi says that even after the fact, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. So what are you going to do? We're stuck. We have these three brises. We're trying to somehow make them all make sense and have consistency in the view of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi's view is consistent throughout. Even after the fact, you're not Yetzer. Rabbi Yehuda's view seems to be hard to fit into this brisa. So what we're going to do is offer a suggestion, then reject it, give a different suggestion, and accept that suggestion. So let's first take the first one at a time. La'olam Rabbi Yehuda. Let's try and suggest that really it's Rabbi Yehuda. Va'afilu lechatchila. And it's talking about even in the first instance, that you don't have to hear the words. V'lo kasha, and there's no difficulty with what to do with the baraisa about grace after meals. Why? Ha didei. In the case of Truma, he's quoting his own opinion. His own opinion is that even in the first instance, you can make the bracha even if you don't hear it, right? And that's why he says that a deaf person right, can separate truma even in the first instance. And in the case of the grace after meals, where he says that a person should not read the grace after meals in his heart, but if he did, he's Yaitse Hadarabbi. That is ruling in accordance with his teacher's opinion. It's not his opinion, but his teacher's opinion. What does it mean, his teacher's opinion? The Tanya, because it was taught in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was his teacher. Now he says, somebody who reads the Shema, he has to hear what he says. He has to make it heard to his ear. Like it says, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem is our Lord, Hashem is one. Hashmei la'oznecho, make your ear hear, Mashato makes me pichol, that which your mouth recites, right? So there you have Rabbi Yehuda quoting from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that what? That you do have to hear what? That you do have to hear what your mouth says, okay? So perhaps what we could say is that in the case of Truma, right, Rabbi Yehuda says his opinion, right? And when it comes to Birchas Hamazon, he says that initially you should do like what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, right? And so therefore he says you should actually not say it quietly, but say it, not say it in your heart, but say it loud. But if you didn't, then you're Yotza. But the Brisa continues and says, Reb Meir says, Reb Meir disagrees with Reb Elazar ben Azariah, and Reb Meir says that when it continues in the pasuk, right, after you say Shema, what's the next pasuk? Let which I command you this day be upon your heart. And this implies that what? Depending on the concentration of your heart, those are the words, meaning to say, you don't necessarily need to hear the words, so long as you have the concentration, then you fulfill your obligation. Okay, so therefore, it seems from this brisa that we could very perfectly say that in the case of grace after meal, right, what Rabbi Yehuda is doing is first he's saying, as his Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, that you should really say it in a way that you could hear. And then he says, but if you didn't, you could rely on the view of Rabbi Meir that it goes after the concentration of the heart. And therefore you're Yotza. So now once you bring this brisa, right? The Gemara asks, now that you've come so far and you've quoted Rabbi Meir's view, you could do as follows. You could even say that Rabbi Yehuda Karabi Svirle, he holds like his teacher Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Okay? The Tani Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, and that which Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shimon ben Pazi, taught, that the deaf person in the first instance can separate Teruma, it's not Rabbi Yehuda at all. It's Rabbi Meir. Okay? In other words, until now, we had three separate brises, or Mishnah brises. You have the case in Brachos. That's with regards to Shema. Then you have the story, you have the case with the Truma. And then you have the case with Birchas Hamazon. We're trying to figure out whether Rabbi Yehuda is the author of all the three Mishnahs, right? So we had difficulty by saying that he holds that lechatchila, you have fulfilled your obligation because you're left with places like the Birchas Hamazon where it says lechatchila you shouldn't, right? Now we can come along and say as follows. The first Mishnah of saying Shema. The first Mishnah of saying Shema. 1 second. I'm getting stuck for a second. The first Mishnah, let's put Shema on the side for a second. I'll come back to Shema in a minute. The Mishnah, when it comes to Truma, we're saying Rabbi Yehuda will follow the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That basically, lechatchila, you should hear it, right? Okay, I got it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I lost it for a minute, but I got it again. Okay, let's do this again. We have 3 Mishnahs, right? We want to know whether Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that lechatchila, you don't need to hear what you're saying or not. So we're saying that now that we have a third opinion, the opinion of Reb Meir, we could come along and say, in all cases, Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Rabbi Yossi in the first instance and say that you do have to hear it because that's like his Rebbe taught, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that you person should hear what he's saying. It's only that Rabbi Yehuda's view is that after the fact, right, after the fact, you are Yetzer b'di'evet, you fulfilled your obligation, right, after the fact. What do we do with the case of Birchas HaMazon, where the beginning of the Mishnah says that the beginning of the Mishnah says that you shouldn't one second. I don't understand. I'm stuck.
You can't depend upon a chirish.
Huh?
I think he's
No,
saying you
Birchas
can't.
HaMazon. Let's take the Birchas HaMazon for a minute, right? How do we explain the Birchas HaMazon? You want to come? Sorry. So, I got it. Okay, fine. So it's only the truma. Okay, fine. So the okay, I got it. The Mishnah that's talking about Shema. That's clearly Rabbi Yehuda. That holds that in the first instance you should hear it, right? And it's only b'di'evet that you're Yotza. And likewise with Birchas HaMazon, again, it's Rabbi Yehuda who says that in the first instance you should hear it, but if you didn't, you're Yotza. What do you do about the fact that in the case of the Truma, it says even lechatchila, the Cherish can do it? That's not Rabbi Yehuda, that's Reb Meir. Okay, got it. Yep. Everybody understand? Before I go on, everybody understand?
Not really. No.
We've got, okay, let me just summarize. We have our Mishnah. We want to figure out who's the author of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that a Cheresh cannot read the Megillah to begin with. And we suggested that our Mishnah is suggesting that even it's after the fact. But then we turned around and we said that, no, we can still fit our Mishnah with Rabbi Yehuda, because what the Mishnah could be saying is that only in the first instance should he not read the Megillah, but if he did read it after the fact, he's fulfilled his obligation. So now we try to figure out whether Rabbi Yehuda has the same opinion throughout, where his opinion is that in the first instance, he shouldn't do it, meaning in the first instance, you should hear what you're saying, right? But after the fact, you fulfilled your obligation. And the spanner that was thrown into the wheel was the brisa that talks about truma, where over there it says even a person who is deaf can go and give truma lechatchila even if he doesn't hear the bracha. So we're like, well, who can that go according to? How does that fit with Rebbe Yehuda? So once we brought the brisa where you have Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah saying that you should hear, and Reb Meir saying even lechatchila you don't have to hear because it says al levavecha, right? In the Shema it says al levavecha. So therefore we say we can establish that brisa, right, about truma in accordance with the view of Rebbe Meir, and Rebbe Yehuda's view can remain consistent throughout. That his view is that in the first instance, the deaf person shouldn't do it, but after the fact, then you have fulfilled your obligation. And so then that he fits into our Mishnah. And as I explained yesterday, the reason why the Chachamim try to establish this Mishnah in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda is because in the case of Shema, right, and that we talk about in Tractate Brachos, right, where it says that if you didn't hear, you still fulfilled your obligation. The Gemara paskins, we paskin according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why we wanted to establish this Mishnah also in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why we go out of our way to make it all fit. Okay?
Got it.
Okay. So now the Gemara continues with the last statement of the Mishnah where it says Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan, that Rabbi Yehuda says that a cotton is qualified. The Tanya, as it was taught in the Brisa, yeah, we're on Daf Chof Amud Aleph. Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda, it says in the Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, cotton, you see, I was a minor. Ukrisil and my law. Rabbi Tarfon was king of Lud, and yet I read before Rabbi Tarfon and the elders in Lud. So therefore, this is a Maisera, this is a story that shows that a minor can read the Megillah before others. Amulai, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, I'm sorry, we cannot bring support from the experience of a minor, right? You're coming now as the Gadol, but you're testifying about something that took place when you were a minor. We can't accept that. Now it's a bit difficult to understand this. Well, why can't you accept it as a minor? There are certain things that when it comes to matters of the Rabbanan, like for example, Erevin and Erev Tchumen, as you know, that you do rely on a child who says, I remember when I was a child, people carried up until this point, right? There's certain things we do rely on a cotton. But it seems that because Mikra Megillah has some kind of scriptural support, so we're going to be a little bit more stringent, and we're saying we're not going to accept the testimony of what you experienced as a minor. Tanya, another brisa, similar incident happened. Amar Rebbe said, I was a minor, and I read it before Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Leila said to him, you can't bring support from the ruling and the behavior of the one who permits it. Of course, we know that Rabbi Yehuda permits it, but the Chachamim disagree with him, and the Chachamim are the majority. So the fact that you happen to be in the shul of Rabbi Yehuda and you read it in front of him and he allowed it doesn't show us that ultimately the halacha is in accordance with that, because the Chachamim disagreed with him. Frank the Gemara, 1 second. In the first case, when Rabbi Yehuda came along, when we brought a brisa from Rabbi Yehuda that says that Rabbi Yehuda did it in front of Reb Tarfon and the skin of Lud, you said we don't accept the testimony of a katan. And here we have the same incident or similar incident with Rebbe, and we don't say that we don't accept the testimony of a katan. We say we don't bring a proof from the one who permits it, right? Because there are those who disagree with him. Frank the Gemara, the lame roulette, why didn't they just say to him, just like they answered in the previous brisa, that Emir V'in Raya Min HaKatan? Why do you choose a different answer, that you don't bring a raya from the one who permits it? So he says, Chada v'oid ka'amrulei. They said both the first thing, that we don't bring a raya from the cotton, but in addition to that, they also told him, right? They said, Chada the cotton hayusa. First of all, you were a minor, and that's why we're not going to accept your testimony. V'oid, and furthermore, afilu god la'yitza, even had you been an adult at the time, right? We wouldn't take any support from somebody who permits it, because he's a yachid, and the rabbin disagreed with him. So the fact that you went into his, that you were allowed in his basic essence to read the Megillah is no proof. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In a previous reading, we had the discussion relative to a minor and their reading being qualified versus one was that they had not attained the age of 10 or 12, but also the other argument was that they had the maturity to be able to then understand what he was reading. So is this not sort of a contradiction in terms of what the argumentation is right now?
So no. So what we were saying before is that there are two opinions in the Mishnah. One seems to be saying that a cotton is not qualified. The other saying that a cotton is qualified. So how do you resolve it? We're saying there's two types of minor. You have a minor here meaning under bar mitzvah. You have a minor who's under bar mitzvah, but he's 6, let's say, and everybody would agree that a 6-year-old who reads the Megillah, you're not yotza. The question is, what happens with a minor who is over a certain age, over the age of 10, right? Then what's his story? Does he fulfill his obligation and your obligation by reading it? So Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that he has fulfilled his obligation for the reasons that you cite, because there's a level of maturity that he's reached the age of chinuch, and so therefore he can fulfill his obligation and the obligation of others. But that's only the view of Rabbi Yehuda. That's not the view of the Chachamim. The view of the Chachamim is that you have to be a gadol, you have to be over bar mitzvah to be able to fulfill your obligation and the obligation of others. Make sense?
So, Rabbi, what were the 2 reasons that they told him? Is number 1 is that you're a yachid, and so therefore we can't accept it.
No.
And the second one is that
First,
synagogue can't be a category.
No. When somebody comes along and says, I witnessed something as a child, right? Do we accept his testimony to decide a halacha in accordance with his memory? So we say that because the edus that you're giving as what you witnessed as a child is not a kosher witness. Since a child is not a kosher witness, we're not going to accept your testimony. That's the first issue. The second issue is that when you witness that one particular Rav who rules differently to the majority gave a ruling that accepts a particular behavior, doesn't mean that was the widely accepted practice, and therefore it should be a story upon which we decide for all future generations that this is the way it should be done. So when you went, Rebbe, as a child, went and read in front of Rabbi Yehuda, there's 2 problems with the testimony you're giving us now. Problem number 1, you were a minor. And since you were a minor, you weren't a valid witness at that time. So therefore, we can't accept the testimony now. That's number 1 problem against you. And the second strike against you is you cannot bring a proof from the one whom we already know has the view that it is permitted. Why? Because the fact that he allowed it in his synagogue is no proof that the rest of his colleagues accepted his opinion. Okay? Here's a problem. Here's an issue that I have. Okay.
No, Rabbi, I understand exactly what you're saying. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
But there's another problem. The other problem is we know from stories in the Gemara that there were Tanoim and Amoraim who they ruled in a particular fashion, in a particular way, and their Chaverim ruled differently to them, and they witnessed somebody else behaving in a manner which they would have permitted, but the majority would not have permitted, and they didn't object, and because of that, they felt so bad, they fasted for God knows how many fasts, because they felt terrible that they didn't object to somebody not following the ruling of their Chaver, which means to say as follows. In general, right, you have the principle of Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim. When you have a minority and a majority, or an individual and a majority, you go according to the Rabbim. That applies even to the Rav who doesn't agree. He has to accept the ruling of the majority. That's just the way it is. That's the way Torah works. So how do we have a situation where Rabbi Yehuda, right, where Rabbi Yehuda would rule differently to his Chaverim, the Chachamim, right? And then actually in his synagogue allowed to go against the view of the Chachamim. That's completely the opposite of what everything we're taught. So what I'm assuming is that Rebbe's story that he's telling took place while the issue was still under debate. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? The issue was still under debate. And because the issue was still under debate, Rabbi Yehuda paskined the way he paskined, and his chaverim were disagreeing, and until it finally became resolved and decided that a kohen cannot do it, right? Until it was finally paskined, like what is the rule for the whole community, right? This Rav did it this way, and that Rav did it that way, until the matter was resolved, okay? Therefore, when we're sitting here in the time of the Gemara, where it seems like they're trying to resolve what the halacha is, they're saying just because Rabbi Yehuda allowed for it doesn't mean that we need to paskin in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, because we know that the chaverim, the chachamim, did not agree with him. So therefore, you can't bring a proof from Rabbi Yehuda. We know he's of that opinion, that he allows it. We need you, Rebbe, to give us proof that you saw other of his colleagues allowing for it, meaning that they accepted his opinion. And that proof you haven't brought. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the finality is that a cotton cannot.
Correct. That's correct. The final.
L'chatchila and b'diavad, either way.
That's correct. Even b'diavad you can't.
So that's like Rabbi Yossi.
That's like Rabbi Yossi, but that's only with regards to a katan. With regards to a cheresh, with regards to the one who's deaf, right, but can speak, we're saying that we will follow the view of Rabbi Yehuda, that if he did read, he's Yaitza and other people are Yaitza.
B'diavad.
B'diavad, that's correct.
Okay.
But with regards to a katan, we're saying that no, we will not accept the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. All right, now we're up to the next Mishnah. Ein korin es Megillah. One cannot read the Megillah. V'loi molin, and you cannot circumcise. V'loi tovlin, and you do not immerse yourself into a mikvah. This is with regards to after counting 7 days. V'loi mazin, and one does not sprinkle again after 7 days, right? Or and similarly, with regards to a woman who guards 1 day against the other, we're going to deal with all of these things and spell it all out in the Gemara. Loi titbo, she should not immerse herself until the sun has risen. What does this mean? This means as follows. It's true that in the Torah, it says Vahi Erev, Vahi Voike Yom Echad, that the Jewish day starts from the nighttime. However, when we say that somebody has an obligation to do something on the 7th day or the 8th day, you cannot do it at the nighttime. So for example, let's take an easy example, a bris milah, okay? We all know that a child has to be circumcised on the 8th day. When did the 8th day start? Well, the 8th day starts the night before. So can I take a child and circumcise him the night before the day of the 8th, meaning that night, already on the 8th? The answer, the Gemara says, no, you have to wait until Netzach Hama. And the same applies to reading the Megillah, and the same applies to going into a mikvah on the 7th day, even if you're going to go to the mikvah during the day of the 7th, you cannot proceed to read it, to immerse into the mikvah the night before, even though it's already considered to be part of the 7th day. You have to wait to Netzach Hama. The Gemara is going to spell out each and every one of these cases, what's going on, okay? And in all these cases, if they perform the mitzvah after dawn, right, after the first ray of dawn appeared, then kosher, which means to say as follows. Ideally, you're supposed to wait till Netzach Hama. Why? Because not everybody is proficient to know when it's no longer night and when it's day. once you have sunrise, then it's clear to everybody. It's clear to everybody that we're now dealing with the daytime, right? However, if somebody got up and performed the mitzvah after dawn, but before sunrise, then after the fact, you shouldn't have done it, but you did it. It's kosher. It's valid. You don't have to go back to the mikvah. You don't have to do anything else, right? You don't have to read the Megillah again and so on, right? Okay, so now we're going to try looking for scriptural sources for each one of these things, okay? So the first thing we said is that what? That when it comes to the Megillah, you shouldn't read it by night. You have to wait till Netzachama to read the Megillah. Frank the Gemara Manalan, how do you know that the Megillah cannot be read before the morning? So he says, the Amakra, because it says in the Pasuk, it says in the Pasuk, these days should be remembered and celebrated. By Yom in, it implies that during the day it can be read, but not at night. Like the Gemara, 1 second. That doesn't make sense. Are we going to say now that this is a refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Shua ben Levi? What did Rabbi Shua ben Levi say? Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, a person is obligated to read the Megillah balayla, at night, and then to repeat it and read it by day. In other words, you have to read it by night and by day. So how does this Mishnah come along and say you can't read it by night? You have to wait till Netzachama. That seems to refute the opinion and the view of Rabbi Shua ben Levi that you need to read it by night and by day. So the Gemara answers, hold on, it's okay. When is the Mishnah teaching that you have to wait till the morning? With regards to the reading of the daytime, we're not talking about the reading of the Megillah at the nighttime. The reading of the Megillah in the nighttime should be done at night. We're talking about the obligation that you have to read the Megillah in the daytime. You have to wait till Netzachama. You can't do it earlier, which means to say like this. You went to sleep on the night of Purim after hearing the Megillah, and you couldn't sleep, right? Because you were excited to use your gragger for Haman in the morning, and you wake up 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's still dark outside. But you're like, okay, but it's already the day, right? So I'm going to read the Megillah. No, the reading of the Megillah of the daytime has to be during the daytime. And what does that mean? You have to wait till Netzachama, you have to wait till sunrise. What if you did it before sunrise? If you did it after dawn, b'di'evet, it's okay. But lechatchila, you shouldn't do it before sunrise, okay? It's not coming to say that you don't read it at night for the night before. Of course you do. Okay, so that's that. Now, moving on to the next thing, which is the circumcision. You're not supposed to circumcise. How do we know that you're not allowed to circumcise before the daytime, meaning the night before? Like it says, and on the day of the 8th shall he circumcise. So therefore we see that it's by the day and it's not by the night. Okay. Now, the next two rulings of the Mishnah, right? That loy tovlin v'loy mazin, you do not immerse and you don't sprinkle, right? From when we know that you have to wait to the day, right? You cannot do it the night before. Because it says, it says, and the pure person shall sprinkle on the contaminated person. And then it goes on to say, on the 7th day. The fact that it says day, that teaches me it cannot be done prior to sunrise, prior to the day. So now, the iskash tefillah lahazoya. Then we compare the tefillah, because it says later on, it says right after, v'rochas b'sari b'mayim, he shall wash his body in the water, which means going into the mikvah, and we equate that because it's brought together with the sprinkling, that just like the sprinkling has to be done by day, so to the tefillah, the immersing has to be done by day. The iskish tefillah lahazoya, we compare and we equate the immersion to the sprinkling. Just like the sprinkling has to be done by day, so to the immersion has to be done by day. Now, that's not to say that you cannot go to the mikvah the following night. You can go by night. It's not a matter of you have to do it during the day and not by night. What we're saying is it cannot be done before the day of the 7th. It has to be already the day of the 7th to be that for you to be eligible to go and be sprinkled with the ashes, the water of the mechatos, or to go into the mikvah. Okay.
Rabbi, a question.
Yeah.
When you're saying at night, are you talking about the night of the seventh day or the night following the seventh day?
The night following the seventh day.
Then isn't that a problem because of the fact that it says on Shlishi v'Shevi'i?
No, because what it's telling me is, right, with regards to the hazaya, yes, it has to be done by day. But when it comes to the mikvah, it's just telling me that just like the sprinkling cannot be done before the daytime of the seventh, so too the mikvah cannot be done before the day of the seventh. Not that it has to be done during the day, like during sunlight, during the hours of the day. It's telling me that one does not become eligible until sunrise to go to the mikvah. If you go later on, the mikvah is still valid.
But the problem that I'm having is the fact that it states the third and the and you go to the
Right.
mikvah on the third and the seventh day. So if
No,
you don't go on this,
Mhm.
if you don't go on the seventh day, you've missed the requirement.
So again, the third and the seventh day is with regards to the sprinkling of the ashes, and that has to be done by day. But it doesn't say explicitly that when it comes to going to the mikvah that it has to be done by day. So we're comparing it to the hazaya, but it doesn't have to be compared in all regards. In other words, that even if one didn't manage to get to the mikvah before sunset, it doesn't mean that everything is lost, right? All it means is that you can go to the mikvah the following night. The only point we're trying to make over here is not to do it prior to the morning of the seventh. That's the only point.
Yeah, I'm still having a problem with that because there is a negative. I mean, there's a pasuk that has the negative. It says if you didn't do this on this day and you didn't do this on this day, then you haven't accomplished.
I'll go back to the psukim, Bli Neder, and I'll start from that tomorrow. Be'ezus Hashem. Okay, I'll go back to the psukim and look at it again, and try to clarify that issue. And I think we'll stop over here because the next part is going to take at least 10 minutes to explain before you can process it, because it's the whole discussion about the Zava Ktana versus the Zava Gedola. A Zava Ktana is a woman who has an unnatural flow after the time that she was a nida. So the first 7 days she's a nida. Then after the time of a nida, if she has a continuation, an unnatural flow for a day, then she has to wait 1 day against that first day. If she has two discharges, unnatural flows, then she keeps 1 day against that as well. Once it's 3, then she's a Zava Gedola, then she has to wait 7 days, and then she has to bring a korban. So the Gemara is going to come along and try and understand why the Mishnah comes along and teaches, singles this out specifically to come and teach me this rule about it being by day. Because once you talk about having to go to a mikvah, right? Why wouldn't it apply to all the cases when you have to go to mikvah? Why are you singling out the shemeres yoim keneged yoim to tell me that she should not immerse herself until netzachama more than others? So we'll deal with that as Hashem tomorrow. Anyway, I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Wonderful
Rabbi.
shir to start the day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Is it going to be written that they Ziva Ktana?
No, it's not
Okay.
going to say Zava Katana, but I'll explain it all. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Zay